Eleanor Whitford pressed her hands flat against her skirts to stop them from shaking. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had rehearsed every word of the apology 17 times on the carriage ride to Blackwood Manor, and still standing at that iron gate in the summer heat of Virginia, every single word abandoned her. She was not here for herself. She was never here for herself. She was here because her sister had told a lie and someone had to pay for it. That someone, as always, was Eleanor. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The butler did not smile when he opened the door. He looked at Eleanor the way men in Virginia looked at women who arrived without an escort, without an invitation, and without a family name worth respecting, with a particular kind of stillness that was worse than contempt. It was indifference. "Miss Whitford," he said, and the name came out flat, like a stone dropped into shallow water. "Yes." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I have come to speak with Mr. Blackwood. I do not have an appointment. I understand that. But I would be grateful if you would tell him that I am here, and that I will not leave until he agrees to see me." The butler blinked once. Then he stepped aside. She had not expected that. She followed him through the entrance hall and told herself not to look at anything. Not the dark wood paneling, not the oil portraits lining the corridor, not the sheer scale of a house that made her father's entire property look like a stable outbuilding. She kept her eyes forward. She kept her breathing even. She reminded herself that she was the daughter of Reverend Thomas Whitford, and that she had never in her life begged for anything. She was about to start. The study was at the end of a long hallway, and the door was already open. Nathaniel Blackwood was standing at the window when she entered. He did not turn around. He was taller than she had imagined, broader across the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that did not come from patience, but from complete control. His coat was dark, his hair darker, and he held a document in one hand, as though he had been reading it when she arrived, and had simply decided to keep reading. "Miss Whitford," he said without turning, "I was wondering when one of you would come." Eleanor stopped 3 feet inside the door. "Mr. Blackwood, sit down." She did not sit. "I prefer to stand, sir, if it's all the same to you." He turned then, and she understood immediately why her sister had been so reckless. Nathaniel Blackwood was not a handsome man, the way the young men at church dances were handsome, soft-faced, eager performing charm for an audience. He was something older and more deliberate than that. His face was all hard angles and careful restraint, and his eyes were the particular gray of a sky before a storm that has already decided it is going to break. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at financial documents, searching for the error. "You prefer to stand," he repeated. "Then stand." He moved to his desk and sat. He set the document down, folded his hands, and looked at her without expression. "You are not Lillian." "No, sir. I am Eleanor, the elder sister. The one they did not send to Boston for the season." The words landed exactly where he intended them to. Eleanor felt them, absorbed them, and kept her face neutral. "The one who stayed home to manage the household, yes. And they sent you here." "I came of my own choosing." Something shifted in his expression so brief she almost missed it. "Did you?" "My sister behaved dishonorably, Mr. Blackwood. She told a great many people that you had compromised her, that she had been alone with you at the Harmon estate, and that your conduct had been improper." Eleanor's voice did not shake. She had practiced this part most carefully of all. "That was a lie, a complete and deliberate lie, and I have come to apologize on behalf of my family, and to ask you, not demand, not negotiate, to ask you what it would take to resolve this matter without destroying us entirely." The silence that followed was very long. Nathaniel Blackwood did not move. He simply watched her, and Eleanor had the unsettling sensation of being read. Not her face, not her dress, not her lack of fashionable jewelry, but something beneath all of that. Something she had not offered for inspection. "Sit down, Miss Whitford," he said again, and this time it was not an order. It was almost something else. She sat. He opened a drawer and placed a leather folder on the desk between them. "Your father borrowed $1,100 from the Blackwood Agricultural Fund in the spring of 1814. The terms were clearly stated: repayment within 4 years with standard interest. He opened the folder. It is now the summer of 1818. The debt has not been repaid. The interest has compounded. The current figure is $1,460. Eleanor had known about the debt. She had not known the current figure. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her expression unchanged. "I see. Your sister's accusation." Nathaniel continued his voice, as even as a surveyor's line was reported in 3 separate households before it was corrected. "My attorney has informed me that under Virginia law, written defamation of character, which this qualifies as given. The letters your sister sent is actionable. The damages I could reasonably pursue would exceed $2,000. "That would ruin us," Eleanor said. "Yes." She looked at him directly. "Is that what you intend?" "I intend," he said, "to hear what you have to say. That is why I let you in." Eleanor breathed once slowly. "Then I will say this. My sister acted out of foolishness and social ambition, and a very poor understanding of consequences. She is 19 years old, and she is not wicked. She is thoughtless, which is a different thing. Though I understand it may not feel different from where you're sitting." She paused. "My father is not a dishonest man. He borrowed that money in good faith, and circumstances have made repayment difficult. That is not an excuse. It is a fact." "And what do you propose?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I came here to understand the shape of the problem before I proposed anything. I find that people who propose solutions before they understand problems tend to make things worse." Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not categorize. Then he slid the financial folder across the desk toward her. "Take a look," he said. "Since you came to understand the shape of the problem." She reached for it. She had been managing her father's household accounts since she was 16. She had learned double-entry bookkeeping from the land steward before he retired. She had in 3 separate years identified errors in the county tax assessments and successfully appealed them. She opened the folder and began to read. The room was quiet for several minutes. Somewhere outside, a horse moved in the stable yard. A clock on the mantel ticked. Nathaniel Blackwood said nothing, and Eleanor was dimly aware that he was watching her not impatiently, but with the focused attention of a man who had decided something was worth watching. Then she found it. She went back. She checked the column again. She cross-referenced the figure against the interest calculation at the bottom of the second page. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Miss Whitford. Your clerk has made an arithmetic error." She turned the folder and slid it back toward him, tapping the relevant line with one finger. The interest was calculated on the compounded balance as of January 1817, but the notation here indicates a partial payment was made in March of that year. That payment was recorded in the ledger but not subtracted before the next compounding calculation, which means the current figure is overstated. He looked at the page. He looked at it for a long time. "By how much?" he said. "By approximately $230, possibly $240, depending on the exact date the payment was received." The silence this time was different. It had a different texture entirely. Nathaniel Blackwood reached into the desk drawer and removed a separate ledger. He opened it. He found the March entry. He ran the calculation himself on a piece of paper with a pencil in a handwriting that was small and precise and revealed absolutely nothing about what he was feeling. He looked at the result. $232, he said. "Yes." He looked up from the paper. He looked at her, and this time, the look was not the evaluating look of a man searching for errors. It was something else, something Eleanor could not name and was not certain she wanted to. "Miss Whitford," he said slowly, "how long did it take you to find that? 4 minutes approximately." "My clerk has reviewed that file 3 times. "Your clerk," Eleanor said carefully, "may be more comfortable with legal language than with arithmetic. The error is subtle. It requires cross-referencing 2 separate entries from different months. Most people reading a document like this would not think to do that. But you did. I manage accounts, Mr. Blackwood. It is what I do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The corrected debt is $1,228. "Yes." "That is still a considerable sum." "Yes," she said again. "It is." He leaned back in his chair, not relaxing, but recalibrating. She could almost see it happening. The way a man adjusts his calculations when a variable changes. "Miss Whitford," he said, "I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to answer me honestly, even if the honest answer is unflattering." "I will do my best." "How many of your father's accounts are you currently managing?" She paused. "All of them. Has your father's land steward position been filled since the previous man retired?" "No." "Are you being compensated for this work?" The question surprised her. She had not expected him to ask something so direct, or something that veered so far from the subject of her sister's lie and her family's debt. "I am part of the household," she said. "It is not the same as employment." "No," he said. "It is not." Something moved through his expression, not quite pity, not quite anger, but something in the neighborhood of both. "It is less." Eleanor said nothing. He stood then, and moved to the window again, and she had the impression he needed a moment to think in a direction she could not follow. She waited. She was good at waiting. "I am going to make you a proposal," he said finally without turning around. "I came to discuss my sister's. I know why you came." His voice was still even, but there was something beneath it now, something that had not been there when she first walked in. "I am telling you that the conversation has changed, and I am asking you to listen." Eleanor pressed her hands flat against her skirts. "I am listening," she said. He turned back to face her, and in the afternoon light coming through the study window, his expression was completely unreadable, and yet she had the strange certainty that whatever he was about to say, he had not planned it when he woke up this morning. "Your family owes me $1,228, he said. "Your sister has damaged my reputation in 3 households. Your father has no land steward, and based on what I just watched you do in 4 minutes, he has not needed one, because you have been performing that function without title, without pay, and without. I would wager a single word of acknowledgement." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Mr. Blackwood, I have a proposal that resolves every one of these problems simultaneously," he said. "But it requires you to make a decision that will be permanent, and I want you to understand that before I say another word." The clock on the mantel ticked. The summer heat pressed against the windows. Eleanor Whitford looked at Nathaniel Blackwood across the width of his study, with her family's debt hanging between them like a blade, and said the only thing she could think to say. "Then say it." He held her gaze. "Marry me." The words landed without ceremony, without softness, without any of the decorative language that proposals were supposed to carry. He said them the way he had stated the debt figure clearly, precisely as a fact he had decided to introduce into the conversation. Eleanor did not speak for a long moment. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am always serious." "You do not know me." "I know," he said, "that you rode to this house without a chaperone, without an invitation, and without a plan to apologize for someone else's mistake. I know that you sat in that chair and read a financial document without flinching. I know that you found an arithmetic error that 3 trained men missed. And I know," he paused, "that you have been running a household and an estate on nothing but obligation and invisible effort for God knows how long, and that no one in your family has thought to ask whether that was fair to you." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, something she did not want to name, and immediately pressed back down. "A marriage," she said carefully, "is not a compensation for unpaid labor." "No," he agreed. "It is a contract, and I am proposing one with specific terms." He moved back to the desk. "Your family's debt erased entirely. Your brother's education at William and Mary secured and funded. Your sister's social standing protected, which is more than she deserves, but which you clearly feel responsible for regardless." He paused. "In return, you manage the Blackwood estates. You have full authority over the accounts, the land steward staff, and the household operations. You hold the title of Mrs. Blackwood, and you are not required to pretend that this began as anything other than what it is." She stared at him. "And what is it?" "A practical arrangement between 2 people who are both in need of something the other can provide," he said. "I need someone competent. You need security. That is not a romantic beginning, but it is an honest one." Eleanor looked at her hands. She thought of her father, whose hands shook now when he signed documents. She thought of her brother James, who was 17 and brilliant, and had been told last winter that William and Mary was beyond their reach. She thought of Lillian, who had caused this entire catastrophe, with the careless certainty of someone who had always had someone else to clean up after her. She thought of herself standing in a stranger's study in the summer heat, negotiating the terms of her own future as though it were a ledger entry, which she supposed it essentially was. "I want it in writing," she said. Something crossed his face, so brief, so controlled, that she thought she might have imagined it. Of course. All of it, every term, every obligation on both sides, witnessed and signed before a justice. Agreed. And one more condition. She met his eyes. "You will not lie to me. About anything. Not the accounts, not the estate, not your intentions, not your opinions. If you disagree with something I've done, you will say so plainly, and I will do the same." Nathaniel Blackwood looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Whitford," he said, "that is the first condition anyone has ever attached to an offer from me. Is it acceptable?" The silence held for 3 full seconds. "Yes," he said, "it is." Eleanor Whitford stood up from the chair that was not quite comfortable in the study of a man she had met 40 minutes ago, in the long gold light of a Virginia summer afternoon. "Then I accept," she said, and neither of them smiled, and neither of them reached out a hand, and the clock on the mantel ticked on indifferent, as though nothing of consequence had happened at all. But something had, something that could not be undone. The document was signed 3 days later. Eleanor had read it 4 times before she put her name to it. She had made 2 corrections, one to a clause about household expenditure authority that she felt was ambiguous, and one to the repayment timeline for her brother's tuition, which she wanted structured in annual installments rather than a lump transfer. Nathaniel had accepted both changes without argument, which unsettled her more than if he had pushed back. A man who argued told you where his limits were. A man who simply agreed told you nothing at all. The justice of the peace was a tired-looking man named Caldwell, who smelled of pipe tobacco and clearly wanted to be elsewhere. He read the vows in a flat, practiced voice, waited for the appropriate responses, recorded the marriage in his ledger, and wished them well in a tone that suggested he did not particularly mean it. Eleanor's father had not come. He had sent a letter instead, 2 paragraphs formal and careful, expressing his gratitude to Mr. Blackwood for his generosity, and his hope that Eleanor would conduct herself with appropriate dignity in her new position. He had signed it Reverend Thomas Whitford, as though she were a business associate rather than his eldest daughter. She had folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket and had not looked at it again. Lillian had not come either. Lillian had locked herself in her bedroom when Eleanor told her what had been arranged, and had said through the door that Eleanor had always wanted to take everything from her, and that this only proved it. Eleanor had stood in the hallway outside that door for a long moment, her hand flat against the wood, saying nothing. Then she had gone downstairs and finished packing. She arrived at Blackwood Manor on a Tuesday morning with 1 trunk, a leather satchel of her personal account books, and no illusions whatsoever. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, met her at the door with the expression of a woman who had been informed of a situation she had not been consulted about, and intended to form her own opinions regardless of what anyone said. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, and the title sat strange in the air between them. "Mrs. Pruitt." Eleanor shook her hand directly, the way she shook the hands of tradesmen and county surveyors, and she watched the housekeeper recalibrate slightly. "I would very much like a tour of the household accounts before anything else. Not the rooms, the books. I understand there is a study set aside for estate management." "There is, ma'am." "Good. After the accounts, the tour. And I would appreciate an honest assessment of where things are most in need of attention. I am not interested in what looks well. I am interested in what is actually working." Mrs. Pruitt looked at her for a moment with the measuring expression of a woman who had worked for difficult employers her entire professional life and was deciding which category this particular one fell into. "The drainage on the south field," she said finally. "It's been wrong for 2 seasons, and the overseer keeps telling Mr. Blackwood it'll sort itself." "It won't sort itself," Eleanor said. "No, ma'am, it won't." Something shifted between them, subtle but real, the way the temperature shifts before a storm clears. "Show me the books," Eleanor said, "and then take me to the south field." Nathaniel was not in the house. She did not see him until dinner that evening, and when he came in, he was dusty from riding and smelled of horses and summer heat, and he stopped in the doorway of the dining room when he saw her already seated, her account book open beside her plate, and for just a moment he looked as though he had forgotten she was going to be there. "You've been at the books all day," he said. It was not a question. "I have. I also walked the south field." He pulled out his chair and sat. "What did you find?" "The drainage problem is not a drainage problem. It's a grading problem. The soil was leveled incorrectly when the field was expanded in, I believe, 1814, based on the expense records. The water isn't draining because the elevation is wrong. It needs to be regraded along the eastern edge." Nathaniel picked up his fork and looked at her across the table. "My overseer said it was a drainage problem." "Your overseer," Eleanor said, "is not wrong that water is collecting where it shouldn't. He is wrong about why. There's a difference." "And the fix?" 4 days of work with the right crew. I've written out the specifications." She slid a folded paper across the table without ceremony. "The cost is approximately $40. If you leave it another season, you will lose the south field entirely to root rot, and the loss of yield will cost you several times that." Nathaniel unfolded the paper. He read it. She watched him read it, the way his eyes moved precise and methodical, and the way one line appeared briefly between his brows before smoothing away. "You wrote these specifications yourself," he said. "Yes." "Today?" "This afternoon. After the books." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the paper down and resumed eating, and he said in a tone that was entirely neutral, "I'll speak to the overseer tomorrow." It was not a thank you, but it was not nothing either. That was how the first week went. Eleanor worked. Nathaniel observed. They ate dinner together every evening with the careful, calibrated politeness of two people who had agreed on a set of terms and were both determined not to violate them first. She found 3 more accounting errors before the end of the week, none as significant as the first, but each one real, each one costing Blackwood money through simple imprecision. She corrected them without announcement and left a note of explanation in the margin of each relevant ledger page. On Friday morning, she found the notes had been read. She knew because the pages had been turned down at the corners, a small thing, a nothing thing. But she noticed it, and she filed it away with the same precision she gave everything else. On Sunday, he asked her if she rode. They were in the entrance hall, and he was pulling on his gloves, and the question came out with the tone of something that had been considered and then released, as though he had talked himself into asking it at the last moment. "I do," she said. "Come then." She had not been on horseback in 8 months. There had been no time, no horse available to her, no occasion that justified the indulgence. But she did not say any of that. She went and changed into her riding clothes and came down in 10 minutes flat, and she saw something cross his face when she appeared. Something quick and unguarded before the neutral expression settled back into place. They rode for 2 hours across the eastern portion of the estate, and he showed her the boundaries of the property in a way that was half practical and half something else she could not name. He pointed out where the timber rights ended, where the creek marked the county line, where there had once been a plan to build a second mill that had never been executed and probably should have been. He talked about the land the way her father talked about scripture, like something that mattered, genuinely mattered, and not because of what it was worth. She filed that away too. On the ride back, he said without preamble, "The overseer started the regrading this morning." "I know," Eleanor said. "I checked before breakfast." He glanced at her sideways. "Of course you did." "Was that wrong?" "No," he said. "It was efficient." She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed and looked forward at the road. It was during the second week that the first letter arrived from town. It came in the Morning Post addressed to Mrs. Nathaniel Blackwood, in handwriting. Eleanor did not recognize. She opened it at the desk in the estate office with the same steady hands she brought to everything, and read it once quickly, and then again slowly. It was from a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, one of the 3 household names Nathaniel had mentioned the first day one of the 3 places where Lillian's lie had spread. The letter was 3 paragraphs of exquisitely polite language arranged to communicate a single message that Eleanor's sudden marriage to Nathaniel Blackwood had not gone unremarked, that questions were being asked about the nature and timing of the arrangement, and that Mrs. Hargrove herself could not, in good conscience, ignore the obvious implication that the marriage had been conducted under some form of duress or financial coercion. Eleanor set the letter down on the desk. She picked up her pen. She wrote back in clear, measured sentences, and she did not defend herself, and she did not explain herself, and she did not apologize. She stated two facts: that the marriage had been conducted with the full agreement of both parties and witnessed by a justice of the peace, and that the financial terms of the arrangement were private, as was customary in all marriages of business and property. She thanked Mrs. Hargrove for her concern and wished her a pleasant summer. She signed it, Eleanor Whitford Blackwood. She sealed it before she could think better of it, and she gave it to the household boy to post, and she went back to the accounts. She did not tell Nathaniel. She told herself it was because the matter was resolved and there was no need. She did not examine that reasoning too carefully. But 2 days later, he came into the estate office without knocking, the first time he had done that, and he set a letter on the desk in front of her without speaking, and it was from Mrs. Hargrove, and it was addressed to him, and it said, among other things, that his new wife had responded to a private communication with what Mrs. Hargrove characterized as unsettling composure for a woman in her position. Eleanor read it. She set it down. She met his eyes. "She wrote to you as well," she said. "She did." His voice was even. "You didn't tell me she'd written to you first. I handled it." "You handled a social communication from one of Virginia's most well-connected women without mentioning it to me." "Yes." She held his gaze. "Was I wrong to—" The question sat between them. His jaw was tight. Not angry, she thought, but working through something that looked adjacent to anger, the way a man works through a problem that has turned out to be more complicated than he expected. "No," he said finally. "Your response was correct. But you would have liked to know." He did not answer immediately. That she had learned was its own kind of answer. "I would have liked," he said carefully, "to not find out from her second letter." "That is fair," Eleanor said. "I'll tell you in the future." "Good." He picked up the letter and turned to leave, and she said, without quite planning, to Mr. Blackwood. He stopped. "She is going to write again," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Hargrove, and she is not going to be the only one. Whatever Lillian set in motion is still moving, and the fact that we married quickly is going to look to people who want to see it that way, like confirmation of something." She paused. "We should discuss how we want to handle it." He turned back fully. He looked at her with that evaluating expression she was beginning to know, the one that was not quite skepticism and not quite trust, and lived somewhere in the complicated territory between them. "What do you propose?" "Nothing dramatic," she said. "Drama would make it worse. What I propose is that we appear in the appropriate social contexts as two people who made a practical decision together and are not ashamed of it. Because we aren't." She met his eyes steadily. "Are we—" Something moved through his expression that she could not read. "No," he said. "We are not. Then we go to church on Sunday. We accept whatever social invitations come in August. We are polite and composed, and we do not volunteer information, and we do not apologize for existing." She paused. "And if someone asks a pointed question, we answer it plainly and briefly, and we move on." Nathaniel Blackwood looked at his wife across the estate office desk and was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be meaningful. "You've thought about this," he said. "I think about most things." "That is becoming apparent." He tucked the letter into his coat. "Sunday, then." The church service was not as difficult as Eleanor had anticipated. It was more difficult in a different way. Not hostile glances and whispered cruelties, which she had prepared for, but a particular quality of scrutiny that was harder to defend against because it wore the face of pleasantness. Every handshake was an assessment. Every question about how she was settling in was a probe for weakness. She answered pleasantly. She revealed nothing. She stood beside Nathaniel with the composed stillness of a woman who had decided a long time ago that other people's opinions of her were information, not verdicts. It was on the walk out of the church that a man named Gerald Ashton fell into step beside Nathaniel. The kind of man who moved through social situations with the practiced ease of someone who had never had to worry about what people thought of him, and therefore thought about it constantly. "Blackwood," he said with a wide smile and a hand extended. And Mrs. Blackwood. What a surprise this all was. He shook Eleanor's hand with the particular grip of a man who wanted to gauge something. We've all been most curious about the circumstances. Have you? Nathaniel said. It was not a question. His voice had not changed, but something in it had shifted a degree colder, a degree flatter, and Eleanor felt it rather than heard it. The speed of the thing. Ashton continued, either not noticing or choosing not to notice. Special license and all. Quite the romantic gesture. He looked at Eleanor with a smile that did not reach his eyes. You must have made quite an impression, Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor looked at him pleasantly. Mr. Blackwood and I found that we had complementary needs and compatible values, she said. In such cases, speed seems more practical than delay. Don't you think? Ashton blinked. I suppose, and you'll find, she added, in the same pleasant conversational tone, that we're both rather practical people. So the curiosity, while understandable, may not yield the kind of story people are hoping for. She smiled, and it was a real smile, and it was also a dismissal. It was lovely to meet you, Mr. Ashton. She turned slightly toward Nathaniel, just a degree, just enough, and he moved with it, and they walked together toward the carriage, with the synchronization of people who had been married for years rather than weeks. In the carriage, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Nathaniel said, complementary needs and compatible values. Was it too much? It was exactly right, he said, and something in his voice buried beneath the evenness sounded like something she was not yet certain she had permission to identify. She looked out the carriage window at the road running back toward the estate, and told herself that the warmth she felt in her chest was nothing more than the satisfaction of a problem handled well. She was almost certain she was right. Almost. The August social season arrived in Virginia like an uninvited guest who had decided to stay regardless. 3 dinner invitations came in the first week alone. Eleanor accepted 2 and declined the third, the one from Mrs. Hargrove, on the grounds of a prior household commitment that did not exist. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow when she told him, and she said simply, not yet, and he accepted that without further question, which was one of the things she was beginning to value about him without quite meaning to. The first dinner was at the Caldwell estate 12 miles north, hosted by a couple who were old friends of Nathaniel's, and who received Eleanor with the guarded warmth of people who cared about someone and were not yet certain about the person he had chosen. Eleanor understood this. She did not take it personally. She answered every question honestly and asked several of her own, and by the end of the evening Mrs. Caldwell had pulled her aside to say in a low, impressed voice that she had not expected Nathaniel to find someone so sensible, and that she meant that as the highest possible compliment. Eleanor said she would take it that way, and she meant it. The second dinner was harder. Gerald Ashton was there, which she had not anticipated, though in retrospect she should have, and he had brought with him a piece of information that he deployed over the fish course, with the careful timing of a man who had been waiting for exactly the right moment. I had a letter from Richmond this week, he said, addressing the table generally, but looking at Eleanor specifically. From a cousin who moves in some of the better circles there. Apparently there's been some conversation about the Blackwood marriage. He paused. Some people are saying, and I want to be clear, I'm only reporting what I heard, that there was a financial arrangement involved. That the Whitford family debt was the basis of the whole thing. The table went quiet in the particular way tables go quiet when someone has said something that everyone is going to pretend not to have heard, and will discuss in detail on the carriage ride home. Eleanor set her fork down. She did not look at Nathaniel. She did not need to. Mr. Ashton, she said, in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and carried clearly to both ends of the table. Most marriages in Virginia involve some financial consideration. Land transfers, dowries, property agreements. I'm not certain why ours would be remarkable in that respect. Well, the speed? We are practical people, she said. We have established that. She picked up her fork again. The fish is excellent, Mrs. Caldwell. It worked. The moment passed. The conversation shifted, but under the table, Nathaniel's hand moved once, just a brief, involuntary motion, his fingers brushing the back of her hand before he pulled back, and she felt it like a small shock, like touching metal in cold air. Neither of them acknowledged it. On the carriage ride home, Nathaniel was quiet for longer than usual. Eleanor watched the dark road and waited because she had learned by now that his silences had shapes, and this one had the shape of something being worked through. "You didn't need to handle that," he said finally. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." Another pause. "Why?" She considered the question honestly the way she considered everything. "Because it was my name they were questioning as much as yours," she said. "And I am not in the habit of letting other people speak for me." He turned to look at her in the dark of the carriage, and she could not see his expression clearly. But she felt the quality of his attention focused careful, the way he looked at things he was trying to understand completely. "No," he said quietly. "I don't imagine you are." They arrived home at 10:30, and at the door of the manor, Nathaniel said goodnight with a formality that felt for the first time slightly forced, as though the natural thing would have been something else, and he had chosen this instead. Eleanor went to bed and lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling, thinking about the back of her hand. The letter from Lillian arrived on a Thursday. Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately, the looping dramatic script that her sister had cultivated in adolescence and never abandoned. She opened it at the estate desk alone in the early morning before Nathaniel was down. It was 4 pages long. The first 2 pages were an account of how unfairly Lillian had been treated by the entire situation. The 3rd page was a series of thinly veiled accusations that Eleanor had engineered the marriage to secure her own position at the family's expense. The 4th page was a request for money, not framed as a request, but framed as a reminder that the contract guaranteed Lillian's social standing, and that maintaining social standing required funds, and that Eleanor, as Mrs. Blackwood, was surely in a position to be generous. Eleanor read it all 4 times. Then she folded it, put it in the locked drawer of the estate desk, and went to breakfast. She did not tell Nathaniel. She was still not certain why. What she was certain of was that she needed to handle Lillian carefully, not for her sister's sake, but because Lillian in a desperate or resentful state was capable of causing damage that could not be easily repaired, and Eleanor was not going to let everything she had built in 6 weeks get dismantled by a 20-page letter-writing campaign to Virginia's social circuit. She sent Lillian $20 with a note of 3 sentences. The note said she hoped Lillian was well, that the $20 was a gift and not a precedent, and that Eleanor would appreciate if Lillian did not contact Mr. Blackwood directly on any matter without speaking to Eleanor first. She did not hear back. That silence worried her more than a response would have. The 3rd week of August brought an unexpected development in the form of a man named Silas Merritt. He arrived at Blackwood Manor on a Wednesday afternoon unannounced, which told Eleanor something about him immediately, since men who arrived at the homes of wealthy landowners without announcing themselves were either very confident or very reckless, and both categories required careful attention. Nathaniel received him in the front parlor, and Eleanor was not invited to join them. She went to the estate office and worked on the timber rights documentation, and told herself the closed door was not her concern. 40 minutes later, Nathaniel came to find her. His expression was controlled in the specific way she had learned meant something had happened that he had not expected. He stood in the doorway and said, "Do you have a moment?" "Of course." She put down her pen. He came in and sat across from her, not at the desk, not in the formal arrangement of their early conversations, but in the chair beside the window, the one she had started to think of as the thinking chair, because she had noticed he used it when something was bothering him. "Merritt is a land speculator," he said. "He's been buying up properties along the western county line for 3 years. He came today with an offer on the Blackwood timber holdings, the northern section, 300 acres. "What kind of offer?" "A generous one, suspiciously so." Eleanor picked up her pen again, not to write, but to have something in her hand. "What does he want with 300 acres of timber that he's willing to overpay for? That," Nathaniel said, "is the question." He looked at her. "He mentioned something else. He said there's a state road plan being drawn up in Richmond, a new route connecting the northern counties to the capital. If the route goes where Merritt seems to think it's going, the northern timber section would become extremely valuable, not as timber, but as road access property." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "And he wants to buy it before that becomes public knowledge?" "Yes." "Does he know that you know?" "He was careful," Nathaniel said. but not careful enough. She thought about it. Who in Richmond would have access to the road planning documents? 3 or 4 men. I know one of them slightly, John Harwick, on the State Infrastructure Committee. Write to him, Eleanor said. Not about merit, just a general inquiry. Mention that you're considering some land improvements in the northern section and would appreciate any information about planned state projects in that area. Keep it casual. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. That will tell him we know something. It will tell him, she said, that you are not uninformed, which is different. She met his eyes. If the road plan is real, Harwick will either confirm it or become suddenly unavailable. Either answer is useful. Something happened in Nathaniel's expression, not a smile, not quite, but something in the direction of one brief and quickly controlled. You think like a surveyor, he said. I grew up with one, she said. My father's land steward. He taught me that the shape of what people don't say is as important as what they do. Nathaniel leaned back in the chair. I'll write to Harwick today. Good. She paused. And tell Merritt you need 2 weeks to consider the offer. Not longer. That looks like you're waiting for competing bids. 2 weeks looks like due diligence. He stood. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she confirmed. He was at the door when he stopped, and this had become a pattern between them. She realized these stopped exits, these extra moments before the threshold, and he turned back and said, Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up. Thank you, he said. Simply, plainly, without the careful neutral wrapping he usually put around everything. She held his gaze for 1 beat longer than she needed to. It's what I'm here for, she said. He nodded once and left. She sat very still after he was gone, and told herself firmly that the fact that her name in his mouth had felt like something was entirely irrelevant. The letter from Richmond arrived 9 days later. It was not from Harwick. It was from a woman named Caroline Aldridge, and it was addressed to Mrs. Nathaniel Blackwood, and Eleanor opened it with the professional attention she gave all correspondence. And then she read it, and then she read it again. And then she sat very quietly for what she estimated was approximately 3 minutes. Caroline Aldridge wrote with the polished ease of a woman accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. She wrote to introduce herself as an old acquaintance of Nathaniel's from his time in Richmond. 7 years ago, she was careful to say, acquaintance underlined lightly the kind of underlining that meant the opposite. She wrote that she had heard such interesting things about his marriage. She wrote that she hoped Eleanor was settling comfortably into Blackwood Manor, and that she intended to call on them in September, and that she was so very much looking forward to meeting the woman who had, as she put it, captured Nathaniel Blackwood's practical heart. Practical heart. Eleanor folded the letter. She put it in the locked drawer with Lillian's. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later when Mrs. Pruitt appeared in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had seen something she had been holding on to all morning. Ma'am, she said, there's a boy come from the post office. He says there's a piece in the Richmond Courier. He thought you'd want to know before Mr. Blackwood saw it. Eleanor stood up. Bring me the paper. It was page 3, a society column, the kind that dressed gossip in the language of civic concern. The item was 4 sentences long and did not name Nathaniel or Eleanor directly. It referred to a prominent Virginia landowner who had recently contracted a hasty marriage with a woman from a family known to carry significant debt, and speculated in the elegantly indirect language of people who know exactly what they are doing about what practical considerations might have motivated such an unusual arrangement. Eleanor read it standing up, which was how she read things she needed to process quickly. Then she sat down. Then she stood up again. Then Nathaniel came through the door. He had already seen it. She could tell by the set of his jaw, not angry, not yet, but close in the way a calm surface is close to what's moving underneath it. He had the paper in his hand, and he set it on the desk between them without speaking. They both looked at it. It could be coincidence, Eleanor said, though she did not believe it. It is not coincidence, Nathaniel said, and he did not believe it either, and they both knew that, so the sentence functioned mostly as confirmation that they were in the same place about it. Someone provided this information, Eleanor said. Someone who knew the specific details of the debt and the timeline, and enough about our arrangement to characterize it this way. She looked at the paper. That is a short list of people, Nathaniel was quiet. She could see him going through the list the same way she was, and she could see him arrive as she had arrived at the same name. "Your sister," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a conclusion. Eleanor did not flinch. "Possibly," she said, "or someone Lillian spoke to who then passed it on. Lillian is not strategic enough to contact a Richmond newspaper directly, but she is careless enough to say things to the wrong person." "Or the right person," Nathaniel said, "depending on whose interest you're considering." She looked at him. "You're thinking of Merritt. He has contacts in Richmond. He would benefit from my reputation being questioned while his offer is still on the table. A man distracted by scandal is less likely to pursue due diligence." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest, not fear, but the particular chill of recognizing a coordinated problem. "He is also less likely to hold out for a better negotiating position," she said. "Yes." "Then this is not just gossip," she said. "This is pressure." "Yes." She looked at the paper again. 4 sentences. Designed to do maximum damage with minimum provocation, the kind of thing that could not be directly refuted, because it made no direct claim. It was perfectly calibrated, and that precision told her that whoever had shaped it knew exactly what they were doing. "We cannot respond publicly," she said. "No." "And we cannot do nothing." "No," he agreed. She put her hand on the paper flat, as though she could press the words back into silence. "Then we do 2 things simultaneously," she said. "We continue the Merritt situation as planned, write to Harwick, hold the 2-week line, give him nothing. And separately we find out who at the Courier received this information and trace it back." She paused. "Do you have anyone in Richmond you trust completely?" Nathaniel was quiet for a beat. "My attorney," he said. "Marcus Bell. Write to him today," Eleanor said. "Not about the article about the road plan. Give him Merritt's name and ask him to look into the connection between Merritt and anyone on the infrastructure committee. If there is a connection, it will also tell us who is feeding information where." Nathaniel looked at her. "You think Merritt and the article are connected? I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that it is a significant coincidence that a piece of gossip specifically designed to distract you appears 9 days after you received a land offer you declined to accept immediately, and I do not like coincidences." The silence that followed was not the silence of 2 people who had run out of things to say. It was the silence of 2 people standing on the same side of something which was a different thing entirely. "I'll write to Bell this afternoon," Nathaniel said. "And I'll write to my father," Eleanor said, though the words cost her something. "He will know if Lillian has been talking. He notices things even when he pretends not to." Nathaniel picked up the paper. He folded it. He stood and moved toward the door, and then he stopped that threshold habit of his and said, without turning all the way around, "Eleanor." "Yes, this did not begin the way either of us planned," he said. "But I want you to know, whatever comes of the Merritt situation, whatever comes of this." He paused, and she heard in the pause the effort of a man choosing words with more care than usual. "I do not regret the contract." She waited until she was certain her voice was steady. "Neither do I," she said. He left, and Eleanor Whitford Blackwood sat alone in the estate office with the folded paper on the desk in front of her, and the locked drawer beside her, and 4 weeks of careful, deliberate, practical partnership in her chest, pressing against something she was not ready to name. Outside a carriage she did not recognize was coming up the long drive toward the house. She watched it without moving, and something at the back of her mind, the part that had always been fastest, the part that had found the error in 4 minutes and mapped the drainage problem in an afternoon, told her with cold certainty that whatever was in that carriage was going to change everything. The carriage belonged to Caroline Aldridge. Eleanor knew it before the door opened, knew it from the way the driver handled the horses. The particular unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in her life arrived anywhere and felt unwelcome. She watched from the estate office window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she closed the account book in front of her, put her pen in its holder, and went to the door before Mrs. Pruitt could get there first. Caroline Aldridge was 32 or 33 with the kind of beauty that had clearly been weaponized for so long it had become entirely unconscious. She stepped down from the carriage in a traveling dress the color of deep water, and when she saw Eleanor standing in the doorway, she smiled with the warmth of a woman who had decided, before arriving, exactly how this encounter was going to go. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said, "I hope I'm not inconvenient." "Not at all," Eleanor said. "Please come in." She said it the way she said everything plainly without performance, and she watched Caroline recalibrate slightly, the way people always recalibrated when Eleanor failed to respond with the expected register of emotion. They sat in the front parlor. Eleanor called for tea. She asked about the journey from Richmond, and Caroline answered with the practiced ease of a woman who was excellent at small talk and using it to observe things. And Eleanor answered with the practiced ease of a woman who had grown up managing conversations between difficult people and had learned long ago how to give the impression of openness while revealing nothing of consequence. They were, Eleanor thought, very evenly matched. "Nathaniel and I were close once," Caroline said after the first cup, dropping the given name with the precision of someone placing a chess piece. "I imagine he's mentioned me." "He has not," Eleanor said pleasantly. "But we are both rather private people. I imagine there's a great deal we haven't discussed yet." Something flickered in Caroline's eyes. Not anger, she was too controlled for that, but recalculation. "How refreshing," she said. "Most married couples I know can't stop talking about each other." "We prefer to let our actions speak," Eleanor said. "It saves time." Caroline smiled, set down her cup. "I'll be direct then, since we're both clearly capable of it." "Please." "I came because I was curious," Caroline said. "Nathaniel Blackwood has declined every form of female companionship for 7 years as a matter of well-documented personal policy. And then within the space of 6 weeks, he marries a woman no one in Richmond has heard of under circumstances that even his closest associates find puzzling." She tilted her head. "I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman managed that." "And," Eleanor said. "And I'm still deciding," Caroline said. But there was something in her voice, not hostility, not quite respect, but something moving in that direction that Eleanor filed away carefully. "Take your time," Eleanor said. "Would you like more tea?" Nathaniel appeared at the parlor door 20 minutes later, and Eleanor watched his face go through 3 distinct phases in the space of about 2 seconds: recognition, restraint, and then a careful neutrality that told her everything about what Caroline Aldridge had once been to him. "Caroline," he said. "Nathaniel." She rose to greet him with the ease of long familiarity, and Eleanor sat still and watched them with the dispassionate attention of a woman who had learned to read the space between people as readily as she read ledger columns. There was history there. Complicated history, the kind that didn't resolve cleanly. But there was also something finished about it. Something that had been put down a long time ago and had stayed down. She could see it in the way he stood, slightly angled away, pleasant but not warm. Not cold either. Just done. That was useful information. "I was just getting acquainted with your wife," Caroline said. "She is remarkable, Nathaniel. I mean that sincerely." "I know," he said, and he said it without hesitation, and Eleanor felt something move in her chest that she was getting less successful at ignoring. Caroline left before dinner with an invitation extended and accepted for a September gathering in Richmond, and as the carriage disappeared down the drive, Nathaniel came to stand beside Eleanor at the door. "I should have told you about her," he said. "Yes?" Eleanor agreed. "You should have." A pause. "I wasn't certain it was relevant." "It was relevant," she said. "Not because of anything she represents now, but because knowing the shape of someone's past helps you understand their present." She glanced at him. "I would have preferred to know before she arrived." "That's fair," he said. "Was she important to you?" The question came out more directly than she had intended, and she saw him register that, saw the small shift in his posture, the way he chose his next words with greater care than usual. "She was," he said. "A long time ago. And then she made a choice that told me something I needed to know about her, and that was the end of it." Eleanor did not ask what the choice was. Something told her she didn't need to, and that asking would be reaching past the boundary of what he was ready to offer. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "That's all?" "That's all," she said. "You answered honestly. That's what I asked for." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "You are not what I expected, Eleanor." She looked at him steadily. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to categorize," he said. She turned and went back inside, because if she stood there any longer in the late afternoon heat with him looking at her like that, she was going to do something that the contract did not provide for and that she was not ready to examine. The letter from Marcus Bell arrived 4 days later. Eleanor was alone in the estate office when it came, which she was grateful for, because she needed approximately 30 seconds after reading it before she could arrange her face into anything resembling composure. Bell had done what she had asked. He had looked into merit. He had found the connection to the infrastructure committee. A cousin, as it turned out, sitting on the exact subcommittee responsible for the northern road route. He had confirmed that the road plan was real, that the route would pass directly through the northern timber section, and that the land value would increase by a conservative estimate of 400% within 3 years of the route's announcement. But that was not what required the 30 seconds. What required the 30 seconds was the second page. Bell had, in the course of his investigation, cross-referenced Merritt's recent Richmond contacts. And among those contacts appearing twice in the previous month, once at a dinner party, and once at a private meeting that Bell had confirmed through a clerk he trusted, was a name Eleanor recognized. Lillian Whitford. Her sister had met with Silas Merritt, twice, in Richmond, in the weeks immediately preceding both the newspaper item and Merritt's offer on the timber section. Eleanor sat with that for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and went to find Nathaniel. She did not run. She had never run from anything in her life, and she was not going to start now. But she walked faster than usual, and when she found him in the stables, talking to the overseer about the regraded south field, she waited with the stillness of a woman holding something explosive very carefully. And when he looked at her and read her expression, and he could read her expression now, she had noticed that the way he had learned to find the signal beneath the surface, he excused himself immediately. They went to the estate office. She gave him Bell's letter. She watched him read it. She watched him reach the second page. She watched his jaw set. "Your sister," he said. "Yes." She gave Merritt the information about our debt, about the timeline, about the terms. His voice was even in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. She gave it to him deliberately. "It appears so," Eleanor said. "Why? I don't know exactly." She paused. "But I have a letter from Lillian in the locked drawer of this desk that suggests she is angry enough and desperate enough to cause damage she may not fully understand the consequences of. She may not have known what Merritt was going to do with the information, but she knew it would hurt us." Nathaniel looked at her. "You had a letter from her. You didn't tell me." It was not an accusation in the way she deserved to be accused, because she had withheld it deliberately, and they both knew it. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because I was trying to protect her, and trying to protect you from having to make a decision about her before I knew what she was actually doing." She paused. "I was wrong not to tell you. I am telling you now." He said nothing for a moment. She watched the effort it cost him, the discipline of a man who had trained himself never to react before he had processed, and who was finding that discipline more difficult than usual. "What does the letter say?" he said finally. She unlocked the drawer and gave it to him. He read it standing, and when he was done, he set it on the desk with the particular careful deliberateness of a man who does not want to show how hard something has landed. "She asked you for money," he said. "Yes. And you sent it. $20, to keep her quiet. Did it work?" "Clearly not," Eleanor said. She paused. "I underestimated how much damage she was willing to do." Something shifted in his expression then, and it was not anger at Eleanor, she could see that clearly. But it was anger in the vicinity of her, which was almost harder to sit with. He turned away slightly toward the window, and she waited. "I trusted this arrangement," he said to the window more than to her. "I trusted that the terms were clear between us. I need them to remain clear." "They are clear," she said. "You kept information from me." "Yes, and I told you so directly as soon as I understood why it mattered." She kept her voice steady. I am not going to apologize for the instinct that made me protect my sister. I am going to tell you that the instinct led me wrong and that it will not happen again." He turned back. He looked at her for a long moment, the full evaluating look, the one that went underneath things. "What do we do about Lillian?" he said. "We bring her here," Eleanor said. "Not as punishment, because she is out of my sight and making decisions with people who are using her, and that is more dangerous than whatever she would do under this roof." She paused. "And because I am not done being her sister, regardless of what she's done." Nathaniel was quiet. "That will be difficult," he said. "I know. She will make things harder." "Probably," Eleanor said. "Most true things do." He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Write to her. Tell her she's coming to stay at Blackwood Manor for the remainder of the summer. Do not give her a choice." "And Merritt?" "Bell can handle Merritt," he said. "I'm withdrawing from the offer entirely. I'll write to him today. Brief final, no explanation. Men like Merritt lose their leverage the moment you stop negotiating." "The road plan." "We hold the land," he said. "And we wait." He picked up Bell's letter. "When the route is announced publicly, the value speaks for itself." Eleanor nodded. "And the newspaper item? We do nothing about it," he said. "Responding gives it oxygen. The best answer to that kind of thing is time and visible stability." He looked at her. "Which we have." She felt the weight of that, though we settle somewhere in the center of her chest. "All right," she said. She was writing the letter to Lillian when Nathaniel came back through the door 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway, not the thinking chair this time, just the door, and said, "The Caldwell dinner, Thursday. Will you come?" She looked up from the letter. "Of course." "They've asked specifically." He paused. "Mrs. Caldwell told me at church that she found you remarkable. She used the word twice." "She used it sincerely both times," Eleanor said. I could tell. Something moved through his expression, warm and uncontrolled, and immediately reined in. "Yes," he said. "I imagine you could." He straightened. "Thursday, then." "Thursday," she said. He left. She looked back at the letter to Lillian at the blank space after Dear Lillian, where she had stopped writing when he came in, and she put her pen to the paper again, and told herself that what was happening between her and Nathaniel Blackwood was still fundamentally a practical arrangement. That the warmth was professional regard. That the we was contractual. That none of what she was feeling had been included in the terms. She wrote 2 full paragraphs before she put the pen down, and admitted quietly and entirely to herself that she was lying. Lillian arrived on a Friday. Eleanor was at the gate when the hired carriage came up the drive, because she had not trusted herself to wait inside, and because she had wanted to see her sister's face before anyone else did. Lillian stepped down, looking younger than Eleanor remembered, and angrier than she had expected, which meant she was frightened, which meant she was Lillian. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Lillian said, "I suppose you think you've won." And Eleanor looked at her sister at the defiance and the fear and the loneliness underneath both, and she said, "I think you made a mistake. I think someone used you to make it worse. And I think you are going to tell me everything starting now, because whatever happens next, we are going to handle it together, whether you want to or not." Lillian's chin wobbled. She pressed it flat. "I didn't know what he was going to do with it," she said. "Merritt. I didn't know—" "I know," Eleanor said. "Come inside." She put her hand on her sister's arm and walked her toward the house, and she felt Lillian resist for exactly 1 step before the resistance collapsed, and she came. They were halfway up the front steps when the sound of a horse coming fast up the drive made Eleanor turn. It was one of the Caldwell Estates riders. He pulled up hard and called out before he had fully stopped, "Message for Mr. Blackwood, urgent, from Richmond." Eleanor's hand tightened on Lillian's arm. "I'll take it," she said. Her voice was steady. It was always steady. The rider handed it down. She looked at the seal. It was from Marcus Bell. She opened it. She read it once. The ground did not shift beneath her, but it felt like it did, because Marcus Bell was writing to say that he had found something else, something beyond Merritt, beyond the road plan, beyond the newspaper item. Something in the deed records from 1814 buried in the original Blackwood land transfer documentation. Something that, if Bell was reading it correctly, meant that the Northern Timber section had never been legally transferred to Nathaniel's name at all. And the man whose name was on the original title recorded in the county records in a clerk's careful hand was Silas Merritt's father. Eleanor read Bell's letter a second time, standing at the foot of the front steps with Lillian's arm still in her hand, and the hired rider waiting and the summer heat pressing down on everything like a held breath. Then she folded it, put it in her coat pocket, turned to the rider. "Tell Mr. Bell that Mr. Blackwood will respond by tomorrow morning. Thank you for your speed." The rider went. Lillian was watching her with the particular wariness of someone who has learned to read the weather in another person's face. "What is it?" "Come inside," Eleanor said. "I need to find your brother-in-law." She settled Lillian in the front parlor with Mrs. Pruitt, and strict instructions that no one was to disturb them, and then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in the east field with the overseer, and she walked the full quarter-mile without rushing, because she needed those minutes to think, to sort what she knew from what she suspected, and what she suspected from what she could prove. By the time she reached him, she had all three categories organized. He saw her coming and dismissed the overseer before she arrived, which told her he had read something in the way she was moving. He met her halfway. "Bell sent a rider," she said, and gave him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched the moment he reached the name Merritt's father, and she saw something happen in his face that she had never seen before. Not anger, not surprise. Something older than both of those. Something that looked like a man recognizing finally the shape of a thing that had been wrong for years without him knowing why. "Ezekiel Merritt," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You know the name. My father bought that section from him in 1813. He looked up from the letter. "He paid full market value. I have the receipt. I have my father's correspondence about the transaction." "Then the original title transfer was either never recorded correctly," Eleanor said, "or someone altered the county records after the fact. Or," Nathaniel said, "Ezekiel Merritt sold land he had already encumbered land with a prior claim attached that he did not disclose, which would mean the sale was fraudulent from the beginning," Eleanor said. "And Silas Merritt has known about it for years and has been waiting for the right moment to surface the title discrepancy." "Until the road plan made the land worth enough to act on," Nathaniel said. "Yes." He was quiet for one beat. 2. She could see him moving through it, not panicking, never panicking, but processing at a speed that she recognized because it matched her own. "I need to go to Richmond," he said. "We need to go to Richmond," she said. He looked at her. "The deed records are public documents," she said. "Bell can pull them, but someone needs to cross-reference them against your father's estate papers, which are here. I know those papers. I organized them 6 weeks ago when I went through the full estate archive." She held his gaze. "You need me there." 1 second. 2. "How soon can you be ready?" "An hour," she said. 45 minutes, he said, and turned toward the house. She was ready in 38. Lillian was a problem she had not fully solved, but she handled it the way she handled most unsolved problems, by addressing the immediate piece and leaving the rest for later. She sat with her sister for 10 minutes before they left, and she said plainly and without anger, "You met with Silas Merritt. You gave him information about this household. I need you to tell me everything you told him, every conversation, every detail, every name he asked about. Write it down, all of it. When I come back, I need that paper." Lillian's face went through several things. Defiance, shame. The particular expression of someone trying to decide if honesty is going to cost more than they can afford. Then she said, "He told me he was a friend of Nathaniel's, that he was worried about you, that he just wanted to understand the situation. And you believed him." "I wanted—" Lillian stopped, started again. "I wanted someone to be on my side." Eleanor looked at her sister for a long moment. "Write it down," she said again quietly. "All of it. That is how you start being on my side." She left before Lillian could answer. The road to Richmond was 8 hours in good conditions. They made it in 7 trading drivers at the halfway point, and sleeping or attempting to sleep in the jolting dark of the carriage. Eleanor did not actually sleep. She sat with her back against the carriage wall and went through the estate archive in her memory, page by page the way she had catalogued it in August, looking for what she had filed and where. Nathaniel did not sleep either. She could tell by his breathing. Somewhere around the 5th hour, he said in the dark, "You organized the estate archive in your first week." "Yes." "You said you went through the full archive." "Everything prior to 1815, she said. "I hadn't gotten to the earlier records yet. They were in worse condition water damage on some of the folders. I was going to get to them in September." "But you remember what you saw?" "Yes." "The 1813 land purchase from Ezekiel Merritt," he said. "Do you remember seeing the receipt?" She thought. She went back through the specific shelf, the specific folder, the specific order of documents. "It was in the third folder from the left on the lower shelf," she said. "Behind the 1812 timber agreements. A single page hand sign dated October 14th, 1813. The figure was $420. Silence. "422, he said. She paused. "You remember it. My father made me read every major transaction document when I took over the estate," he said. "He believed a man should know what he owned and what he paid for it." "He was right," Eleanor said. Another silence, softer than the earlier ones. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. When this is resolved—" He stopped, started differently. "There are things I should have said before now." She waited. "The arrangement we made," he said. "The terms we agreed to. I have been holding to them very carefully, because they were what you agreed to, and I did not want to." He stopped again, and she heard in the stopping the effort of a man trying to be precise about something that resisted precision. "I did not want to move the boundary without your permission." Her heart was doing something she was going to have to address later, when she had more time and fewer crises. "Which boundary?" she said carefully. "The one," he said, "that keeps this a contract." The carriage hit a rut and swayed, and neither of them moved, and the darkness between them held the sentence like something fragile. "We can talk about that," Eleanor said finally, "when we get back." "Yes," he said. "When this is settled." "Yes." She looked at the dark window and felt the road moving under her, and told herself firmly that she was going to focus on Silas Merritt and county deed records and the estate archive for the next 24 hours, and she was almost entirely successful. Marcus Bell was a small, precise man, with ink-stained fingers and the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years reading documents that people did not want read. He met them at his office at 7 in the morning with coffee and a stack of papers he had already pulled from the county records office, and he got straight to it, because Eleanor had written ahead asking him to, and because men like Bell appreciated being asked to get straight to it. "The original deed," he said, putting it on the table between them, "is recorded in the county ledger as transferring from Ezekiel Merritt to Harlan Blackwood in October 1813, which matches your records." He put a second document beside it. "This is a secondary document filed in the same ledger 14 months later, in December 1814. It records an encumbrance, a prior debt claim attached to that same parcel of land allegedly predating the 1813 sale." Eleanor leaned forward. She read the December 1814 document carefully. Then she looked at both documents side by side. "The handwriting," she said. Bell looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Yes. The October 1813 entry and the December 1814 entry were written by the same clerk," she said. "But the ink color is different. And the 1814 document uses a dating convention the way the month is abbreviated that matches the 1816 ledger entries I can see on this shelf, not the 1814 ones." Bell smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "I noticed the same thing this morning," he said. "Which suggests the 1814 document was not filed in 1814. "It was filed later," Nathaniel said. "Backdated." "Yes," Bell said. "And there's one more thing." He put a third document down. "Silas Merritt filed a legal notice of title claim 6 weeks ago, quietly through a county clerk in a different district. The timing corresponds almost exactly with his approach to you about the purchase offer." Nathaniel looked at the legal notice. His jaw was set. "He came to buy it, knowing he was about to claim it." "He came," Eleanor said, to see if you would sell cheaply before you discovered the claim. If you sold, he had the land without litigation. If you refused, she tapped the legal notice. He had this waiting. Can we challenge the 1814 document? Nathaniel asked Bell. On the basis of the dating evidence, yes, Bell said. Strongly. I can have a counterfiling prepared by this afternoon. The ink analysis alone will raise serious questions. Combined with your original receipt and any correspondence your father kept about the transaction, I have both, Eleanor said. The receipt and 3 letters from Harlan Blackwood to a business associate discussing the purchase. They're in the estate archive. I can describe their exact location. Bell looked at her, then at Nathaniel, then back at her. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, I believe we have a case. They were at the county records office by 9, with Bell and a notary, and Eleanor stood at the records table for 2 hours, cross-referencing every entry in the 1813 and 1814 ledgers, with the patience of a woman who had once spent an entire afternoon finding a $200 arithmetic error, and considered this well within normal working parameters. By 11 o'clock she had found 2 more anomalies, small ones, easy to miss, but consistent with the pattern Bell had identified. The 1814 document had been inserted. The encumbrance was fabricated. She wrote it all down in her precise, even hand and gave the notes to Bell. At noon, Nathaniel filed the counterclaim. At 1 o'clock, Silas Merritt arrived at Bell's office. Eleanor did not know how he had found out so quickly, but she was not surprised. Men like Merritt had eyes everywhere, which was how they operated, and the moment a counterclaim appeared in the county records, his informants would have told him. He was a large man, broad and ruddy-faced, with the manner of someone who had never had a plan fail in a way he hadn't anticipated. He walked into Bell's office and stopped when he saw Eleanor sitting at the table, and something moved through his expression, not fear, but the first acknowledgement that a variable he had not accounted for was sitting 3 feet away from him. Blackwood, he said, looking past her at Nathaniel. Merritt, Nathaniel said. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the title documents. There has been no misunderstanding, Eleanor said. Merritt looked at her directly for the first time. Mrs. Blackwood, this is a legal matter. I am aware of what it is, she said. I am also aware that the December 1814 encumbrance document was filed after the fact, using a dating convention that did not come into use in this county until 1816, and that the ink pigmentation does not match any other document in that ledger from the period in which it was allegedly written. She held his gaze. I am also aware that you had 2 conversations with my sister in Richmond in July, during which you obtained private information about this household that you subsequently used to construct a strategy designed to pressure my husband into selling land cheaply before discovering a fraudulent title claim that your father manufactured and that you have been holding in reserve for years. The room was very quiet. Merritt's face had gone several shades past ruddy. I don't know what you think you... Mr. Bell has the counterfiling, Eleanor said. We have the original receipt. We have 3 letters from Harlan Blackwood discussing the purchase in detail. We have a dating analysis of the 1814 document that will not survive legal scrutiny. She paused. You are welcome to proceed to litigation. Mr. Bell informs me the process will take approximately 18 months and will involve a full public examination of every document your father filed in this county between 1810 and 1820. Another pause. Or you can withdraw the title claim this afternoon in writing witnessed and recorded, and we will consider the matter closed. Merritt looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel said nothing. He had said nothing for the last 3 minutes, and Eleanor understood that this was deliberate, that he was giving her the floor, not because he couldn't speak, but because he had decided she had earned it. She speaks for this household, Nathaniel said simply. What she has said is what I would have said. Merritt looked between them. Whatever calculation he was running, it took less time than Eleanor expected. I'll need until tomorrow morning, he said. You'll have until 4 o'clock this afternoon, Eleanor said. The records office closes at 5. He left. Bell exhaled. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, I have been practicing law for 22 years. And, she said, and I would very much like to know where you studied. I didn't, she said. I just paid attention. Merritt's withdrawal was filed at 3:47. Eleanor held the confirmed copy in her hands and felt something release in her chest. Not triumph. Not exactly, but the particular relief of a problem correctly solved, which had always been the closest thing to satisfaction she knew. Nathaniel took the document from her, gently looked at it, and then looked at her. "It's done," he said. "Yes." "You did that." "We did that," she said. He shook his head slightly. "Eleanor, I know what I contributed and I know what you contributed. Do not minimize what you did." She looked at him. This man she had met 10 weeks ago in a study that smelled of old paper and summer heat. This man who had offered her a contract when what she needed was a way out. This man who had sat in the dark of a carriage for 7 hours and told her there were things he had not yet said, and she felt the full weight of everything she had been not naming settle into something clear and undeniable. "All right," she said. "I did that." "Yes," he said. "You did." They were back at Blackwood Manor by midnight. Lillian was asleep in the guest room. Mrs. Pruitt had left cold food on the kitchen table and a lamp burning, which was her particular form of welcome, and Eleanor sat down and ate without ceremony because she had not eaten since morning. Nathaniel sat across from her and ate too, and it was late, and they were tired, and the crisis was finished. And in the quiet of the kitchen, with the lamp burning low between them, she thought that this ordinary, unglamorous, exhausted moment was the most honest thing she had experienced in months. "You said there were things you should have said before now," she said. He looked up. "In the carriage," she said. "You said when this is resolved." "Yes, it's resolved." He set down his fork. He looked at her with the full attention she had come to know as his particular form of honesty, the look that went underneath things that searched for the error that had found her 10 weeks ago as something worth keeping. "I don't want a contract," he said. "I want what we have already built, which is more than I have known how to name, and I am not a man who is comfortable with things he cannot name." He paused. "But I would rather be uncomfortable and honest with you than comfortable and dishonest about what this has become." Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen table, in the lamplight, tired down to her bones, and more certain than she had been of anything in her life. "The contract," she said, "has been irrelevant for weeks." Something moved through his face, something that had been held back a long time, controlled and careful, and finally released. "Yes," he said. "I stayed," she said, "because I chose to. Not because of the terms, not because of the debt or the title or any of it." She met his eyes. "I want you to understand that." "I do," he said. "And I want you to understand that whatever I offered you at the beginning, the terms, the practical arrangement, the careful distance, I would take all of it back if I could. Not because it wasn't honest, but because you deserve to be chosen, not contracted." She stood up from the table and walked around it, and he stood, and she looked up at him in the low light and said, "Then choose me now. That's sufficient." He took her face in his hands with the careful deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered, and he said, "Eleanor Whitford Blackwood, I choose you, without terms, without conditions, without a document in sight." She put her hand against his chest over his heart and felt it beating steady and real and present. "Good," she said. "So do I." Outside, the Virginia night was warm and full of crickets and the distant sound of the creek that marked the county line, and inside Blackwood Manor, a lamp burned in a kitchen where two people had begun as a transaction and had become through honesty and stubbornness, and 4 minutes of careful arithmetic, and 7 hours in the dark, something neither of them had thought to plan for. They had not planned for truth. They had not planned for trust. They had not planned for the way a practical arrangement could become the most profound choice either of them had ever made. But some of the best things in a life are not planned. They are built slowly, carefully, incorrectly at first, and then more truly by two people who decide against all reasonable expectation to keep showing up for each other until showing up becomes the only thing that makes sense. Nathaniel Blackwood had offered Eleanor Whitford a contract. She had given him something better. She had given him the truth, every uncomfortable, uncategorizable, irreducible piece of it, and he had been wise enough finally to call that what it was. Not a transaction, a marriage.